Hey, everybody. Welcome to Pastor Jamie's discussion each week. My settings around me may look a little different, and that's not because I changed my Zoom picture or anything. But I am not in my office today, so I'm doing it down in my office at home. I normally would use the text for this week for the Wednesday, which for today would be November 18th. But actually, we had some great texts for worship this past weekend, and I chose the gospel text about all the talents. But there was also this tricky little passage from Zephaniah that I jokingly was talking with my assisting minister before worship this past Sunday, and they were just like, wow, I mean, you had to choose Jeremiah or from Zephaniah and from the Gospels. Lucky you. But they were both interesting in their own ways. And so I want to take some time today to talk about that piece from Zephaniah, because I think it does bring us some important points to discuss. So first of all, let me begin by reading this. It is from Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 7 and verses 12 to 18. Be silent before the Lord God, for the day of the Lord is at hand. The Lord has prepared a sacrifice. He has consecrated his guests. At that time I will search Jerusalem with lamps, and I will punish the people who rest complacency on their dregs. Those who say in their hearts, the Lord will not do good, nor will he do harm. The wealth shall be plundered, and their houses laid waste. Though they build houses, they shall not inhabit them. Though they plant vineyards, they shall not drink wine from them. The great day of the Lord is near, near and hasting fast. The sound of the day of the Lord is bitter. The warrior cries out aloud there. The day will be the day of wrath, the day of distress and anguish, a day of ruin and devastation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness, a day of trumpet blasts and battle cry against the fortified cities and against the lofty battlements. I will bring such distress upon the people that shall walk in the blind, because they have sinned against the Lord. Their blood shall be poured out like the dust, and their flesh like dung. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to save them on that day of the Lord's wrath. In the fire of his passion, the whole earth shall be consumed. For a terrible end he will make for all the inhabitants of the earth. Here ends our reading. What is he thinking? I mean, what sounds so good and cheery about that he would want to talk about it? But quite honestly, it is the texts like these that are challenging and seem to be full of doom and gloom that I think it's good for us to take a moment and talk about a little bit, because these are ones that are really a challenge. It's easy when Jesus is talking about loving one another and how we should treat each other. But some of these Old Testament passages where God is basically getting very upset with people, and people are interpreting things and thinking that bad things are going to happen. And when bad things do happen, they blame God for it. We haven't really moved very far from that one, have we? I think it's important to talk about these texts, though. And I think it's interesting first to start out with a quote from Helen Keller, who once said that science may have found a cure for most evils, but it has found no remedy for the worst of them all, the apathy of human beings. And a great Jewish political activist, Eli Wiesel, said something similar. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. The opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. Let me read that quote over again. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. The opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. Though perhaps not as well remembered, the prophet Zephaniah suggested that God just may be saying the same thing to us in this text. Because see, Zephaniah 1 verse 7 starts this series of, actually, it's the second of a series of these oracles in the book of Zephaniah. And the passage introduces the day of the Lord as a day of sacrifice. See, here Zephaniah portrays God as the priest who will offer the sacrifice, and this is accompanied by two important implications: that Judah is the sacrifice and the guests are armies of destruction. The sole principle behind this for this ritual is named in the beginning of the oracle: to be silent in the presence of God. The implications are present in verse 7 and after, as we heard, are more pronounced as it progresses through. These verses seem to be somewhat poetic in nature, but they emphasize emphatically that God cares about justice. That God cares about justice and so much that God is going to be willing to search out all through Jerusalem the people that are complacent and indifferent city dwellers who view God as the same. In a near crass metaphor, the writer compares the complacent to spoiled wine dregs. Now, I'm not a wine drinker, but I've been told that dregs are the sediments of the grape, and they were used in wine to make them provide a body and a better color. But when the wine sits too long in the dregs, it becomes spoiled and thick and real syrupy. And I don't think anybody really likes some syrupy wine. But as do those who are unwilling to work for justice. The punishment in all of this is denial. The complacent are denied for their fruits of the labor. Though they may work to accumulate wealth and all the physical possessions they can have, they are not permitted to enjoy them. After the initial warning against complacency and indifference, Zephaniah repeats it once again, that the day of the Lord is at hand, that the day of the Lord is coming quickly, and if people don't get their act together, then it's not going to be good for them. Similar verses align with the voice of God in the psalmist's portrayal of power and majesty, and the heightened of the nature of the day as one of ruin. But we're told that on the day of the Lord, nothing will be able to save the people. Blood will turn to dust, flesh will turn to nothing but dung. No material possessions will be able to save the people at all, for the Lord will rule and the Lord will see that God's ways are asserted on this earth. Now, I must admit, that sounds like a lot of doom and gloom, but as I read about it and as I thought about it and stuff, this passage, is often quoted like that phrase that I started out with. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. Throughout the oracle, Zephaniah and the prophet emphasize that. They emphasize it emphatically that the day of the Lord is about taking a stand. The day of the Lord is about calling upon our brothers and sisters so that we are not indifferent and complacent, and that we determine that God operates the same way. God's words that are spoken in Zephaniah here, they indicate the exact opposite, actually. God is not indifferent. God is not complacent. God is not actively working to ensure that there will be an ongoing relationship. And that relationship that God has established is between God and God's people. And that is at the heart of this particular story. God is not indifferent, and neither are God's people. We are not called to be indifferent about our relationship with God, about our politics, about our social well-being and the well-being of all, or about anything else that God cares about. And again, while we're told that a clarion will call against indifference, it might be also important for us that it will not go unnoticed as the liturgical year comes to an end. Like many others now, as we get closer, it points to the end. However, to stop at the end and to read that the passage to which Zephaniah points to is not the faithful day of doom and gloom, but rather the end is the day of the Lord that is when God's rule will be extended over the nations, such as Judah and Israel and us. The day of the Lord is a day when indifference will no longer be tolerated. The day of the Lord is when out of blood and ashes and flesh and dung will in fact come something good. The promise of a future where God's reign over all people and all things. So as we get closer to the end of this liturgical year, it's important for us to sound a call as well, to know that as God is, one must experience a future revolution. The day of the Lord brings no wrath and judgment, but the future in which all things are made new by God, who cares about God, of all things and all people. Regardless of what you're trying to put against each other, love or hate or any of those things, the biggest thing that we can do is be indifferent. So let us not be indifferent. Let us love God and show that love to God by how we treat and stand up for others. That's what I got for this week, everybody. I will not be doing a devotion next week because it is the day before Thanksgiving and I may be doing some traveling. So I will follow up with you the last week in November, first week of December, depending on where that Wednesday falls. I haven't looked at the date yet, but I will see you in a couple weeks. And until then, take care of yourselves and each other.